17th, 2016. And we have myself, Rod Vag, Alexis Compiler, Michael Dawson, Michael Rogers, James Snell, Jeremiah St. Peel, Bert Belder on the call. And an apology from Brian Hughes, who missed the time change because of DST. Well, he's got another meeting conflict anyway. So quick review of last meeting. We talked about the TSC scope, issue number 59. We'll be talking about that again today. We talked about guidance to proposal section, and we sort of deferred that pending questions of scope. And we talked about meeting tools and how we're live streaming now. Quick stand up. Is there anyone here that wasn't in yesterday? How is my audio coming through? Alexis, you're saying you have trouble?
Audio?
It was probably on my end. Yeah, I just lost it for a second.
Okay. Let's skip stand up because I think we were all on the CTC call yesterday. Unless anyone's got anything that they want to fill us in on TSC level that they've been doing. No. Okay.
No, nothing happened.
Let's move on to the meeting. And so we're talking about issue number 66 in the TSC repo, which is Node.js users feedback, filed by Michael Dawson. So this is about looking at how we can broaden our feedback from users. So people who have Node in production. Michael, do you want to lead us off with some your thoughts on the concerns here that led to filing the issue?
Right. Yeah, I think it's around that, we have very good representation from, companies in the TSC, CTC in terms of people who are working with Node, to sell products or to support customers. But, in discussion with one company that actually runs it in production, it didn't seem like there's as good a representation of the companies that are basically they don't necessarily build Node or tools, but they are using it in production. And so having an insight into what the issues they're facing, what kind of feedback they would give us would be another piece that would help us figure out, how we think Node should evolve in the right direction to go. And so the issue is around, how do we get more of that input? And I guess, backing up after some of the discussion, it's about, well, do we think there's an issue or not there? If we already think we have enough input, then hey, we're done. If we think that no, we could use more coverage in that area, then can we come up with ways of improving that?
So I'm going to reiterate something I said in the issue, which is that Node is huge. The number of users is just massive. The number of companies with Node in production is phenomenal. Getting any good representative slice of that is going to be difficult. Doesn't matter what route we take. And so I maintain that the best path that we know and we have so far for doing that is the governance model we have, where if Node is important enough to you, and whether that's using it in production or as a service company or whatever, then you can invest in Node by contributing resources to core. And the companies that do that get empowered, or the individuals that the companies invest through get empowered through the governance model to help guide Node. So we see that already with existing companies that are using Node, like PayPal, for example. PayPal have not only invested in the platinum seat on the foundation, but they are paying for Fyodor's time. They also, individuals from PayPal come in occasionally and contribute to parts of working groups and activity in core. They engage and they are empowered. And other companies do that as well. We have other members of the collaborator team and the CTC team who are paid for by companies. And we also have service provider companies that do that as well. So we have NodeSource being a prime example of that. We are well connected with some large companies that deploy Node in production, and our concerns for core are heavily driven by that, particularly in the LTS working group. That comes from the knowledge and understanding and sometimes direct feedback we get from those companies. So our existence as a company is partly dependent on by these companies, and it's in our interest to serve those companies and to provide that into core. So I know that it's not perfect. I know that it's not a perfect representation, but I maintain that it's the best model so far that we have for doing that. And I don't think that going out there and fishing for a more representative group is actually going to lead to anything productive other than an unrepresentative selective committee of people who are vocal enough but aren't invested enough to put real resources in. That's my perspective, but happy to hear others.
So, I mean, that's a good point. I just want to say there may be reasons why people aren't participating other than just they don't have the resources. Like, there may be other artificial barriers that we have to participation, and if we can identify them, then we can fix them, right? So if somebody's coming to us and saying we have this particular problem and we're not enabled to fix it, then we should resolve that and make it sure that they can participate in that way.
Yep, I completely agree with that. That our focus should be on decreasing barriers to contribution. That should be our primary efforts here.
So I mostly agree with Rob, I think, in the sense that we don't create a whole lot of incentive for people to actually contribute to core. And so if, having a little bit of influence can entice people to do that, then that's great. And we should probably hang on to sort of this mechanic. At the same time, I'm a little afraid that, the type of users that will give input or will engage in the issue tracker or even in work groups are typically power users that already know a lot about Node, know how to figure out things themselves, etc. And that kind of leaves out the feedback from people that are not, that have to use it or want to use it somehow, but are not necessarily super invested in it, if you know what I mean. And so I do actually have a bit of a concern that we are missing out on those areas. I'll give you an example. Like, I never realized until I talked to an enterprise developer, otherwise, who would not engage in the community, but I never realized that we actually didn't document which TLS ciphers we support, and there's basically no way to find that out except ask Ben. But I would not know because, these are the kind of things that people don't typically bring up. So I don't know. I see value in getting more feedback. It's just that I don't want it as another venue for pushing a corporate agenda on what we are doing.
Right. I mean, I share your concern.
I add to that as well.
Yeah. Just the technical barriers alone are enough to keep a lot of people out. But at the same time, I don't think that representation in any kind of committee is ever going to fix that, because the community is just way too big. We're always going to leave a ton of people out if we try to staff a particular body and say, you're representative of the users, tell us what you want. Really the only way that we can do this is through outreach and data gathering, really, or at least that I can see. I don't know.
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is also what Michael Dawson had in mind, which is how can we gather data, get particular user feedback. Yeah, so I mean, I think
right. It doesn't need to be anything that gives people more influence, but something which gets us more data to make our decisions on. Obviously that does.
So just to add to that. There's other sectors of users that are going to be almost impossible to reach, but we ought to keep our minds open to them. And one of the obvious ones is the build tool community, which often don't even think of themselves as Node users, and yet they are responsible for a huge amount of Node adoption, which is, if we accept that as our mission, then that's an important sector. But it's going to be almost impossible to get feedback directly from them, because engaging them it requires them to identify as Node users, and they're not going to, or they're largely not going to anyway. So I think while I maintain that the structure we have is the best structure for governance and direction of the project, I think we do need to have our minds open for this and continually be looking at ways to reach out and connect. But yeah, if it comes down to questions of governance, which is my issue here with the discussion in issue number 66, then I maintain that what we've got is good. So there are two sort of things here, and Michael, I think you're right in saying that it's largely about trying to find out from users what we're missing, where our blind spots are.
Yeah, I only really mentioned the one idea, which was the user council, because for some reason I thought that had been discussed earlier on. But really, it's whatever way we can think of to come up with, to gather the data so that we know what those users are doing, what's important to them, and we can use that as input to our decisions.
Yeah, the idea of a user council had been discussed, but it was largely dismissed for exactly the reasons that are being discussed here.
Yeah.
That it's very difficult to get any kind of accurate representation if you do that way.
Just to reiterate a little bit what Ron is saying about how difficult it is to get feedback from people that don't identify as Node developers. There was a survey that Stack Overflow did recently, and JavaScript was ranked incredibly high for full stack developers using it in their stack. And when they asked them what they were using on their back end, a lot of these full stack developers said JavaScript at like 80% and said Node at something like 20%. So they're even using Node in there's not another back end JavaScript thing that I forgot about and didn't notice that was 4 times bigger than us. So it's literally like they're just not identifying that even when they're using Node in the back end that they're Node developers in any way, or that's Node. They're just JavaScript people.
Okay, it's kind of impossible to take notes while doing this discussion. Thanks, Jeremiah, for contributing to that. So can I suggest that this is just something that I'm not sure that we can get actionable resolution on, but it is certainly something that we should be concerned about on an ongoing basis. How do we reach out? How do we lower barriers? How do we connect better with users in their various forms? And how do we even understand what it means to be a user? Because that we shouldn't be too blinded by our preconceptions about what it means to be a user, that it's likely that we'll miss a sector of users if we do that and don't continue to try and learn about it and understand those users. Unless anyone wants to suggest an action that we can take here.
In the terms of the people who are the companies that are foundation members, is there any value in asking how, if they have any ideas for how getting input from them, if they're in, if we have people who are more the end user type people, is that any use? I think part of the problem is we don't know how to get the data we'd like to get, right?
Well, we did have a survey that we did that was pretty enlightening on some of the educational efforts that we're doing and kind of where Node is being used. We could build something similar and have the marketing committee, which is essentially all of the members, companies, provide input into that survey and then distribute it. When we end up doing those surveys, they get distributed widely among the member companies, so a lot of their developers fill them out as well. So yeah, if we have specific things that we want to learn, we can do that again. I mean, there's always an understanding that there's a huge selection bias of surveys, right? But if you ask particular questions, you can quantify the bias. So, for instance, like in the survey that we just did where we had like 12 or 1,300 responses, one of the questions was how much experience in Node do you have? So we know, based on Node adoption trends, we know how much experience is out there, and we can kind of say like, oh, wow, this is representative of like this 25% cluster of our user base. And so, yeah. So it's really usable data. You just have to make sure that you can quantify it right so you can slice it up and know what it's representative of.
I think we do have to be careful with using the member companies specifically as a group. Not that I think there's value there, and I think that they are actually a good slice of of concern, like in terms of the different ways they use Node. But we have had this sort of explicit separation between technical governance and foundation governance, and we don't want to blur those lines too much to make it so that you can you buy control over Node by buying into the foundation. We don't want to disincentivize foundation membership, but we don't want to connect those too much to blur the lines of governance. That's all. I'm not saying there's nothing to do here. I'm just warning caution on that. Okay, let's move on. We can revisit this one. Maybe in the future we need to come back to it now and again to discuss it. But if we can keep it to actionable things, so if you've got a suggestion for what we can do, then let's do that. Otherwise, we're just going to go around in circles with discussion. So next one is issue number 59 again, which is TSC scope. Michael, do you want to talk about where we're up to with this, and how we might be able to move forward?
Yeah, sure. So I think, Alexis made a good point that there's two things in here, and we should probably talk about them separately. I don't think that we can separate them in the proposal, but I do think that we should talk about them separately. So first, let's just talk about the scope part. So there's basically a statement in there that says that the TSC directly oversees core and the projects that need to be integrated into the development of core. And as sort of an exception to that, there's this mentorship thing, but it gets us out of gets the TSC out of long-term hosting of projects, and essentially kicks that decision down the road a little bit to figure out where those projects go. We really need to figure out, like, is that acceptable to everybody? Does anybody want to be managing a long-term umbrella under the TSC? Or does anybody think that scope is too big and maybe wants to bring it in even more?
I don't particularly want us to rule it out.
Yeah, I mean, for some in particular, like Man or, I don't know, some that are pretty tightly closed, or libuv, it doesn't seem bad to have those there ongoing, right?
libuv would be. So projects that need to be integrated into core development would stay under the TSC. So like evangelism does a ton of stuff that's not core, but it's integrated in the development, it stays under. Inclusivity is the same way, right? They're doing a lot of stuff outside of core. libuv does a bunch of stuff outside of core, but it's integrated in core development, it would go there. You could also see something like serial port probably land as well. Like if we decided that one of the ways to make serial port better was to integrate it with core development, that would come into the TSC still. It's just really things like Express would not be in, or Appium or NodeConf and some of the other proposals. It does kind of draw that line.
So that line is drawn by saying integrated with core. Is that the wording here? How is that line drawn at the moment?
Yeah, integrated with core development.
So let's hypothetical NPM into this. Is that integrated into core development?
Yeah, it's literally shipped with core.
Yeah, we ship it, but we don't do anything else with it. That's always been the thing. Like it's not really a dependency of core, except that we just sort of ship with it.
You could say the same thing of libuv, though. I
mean, no, you can't, because all of our APIs require libuv to work, or like lots of them do. Like we don't actually use NPM
we can ship without NPM. We can ship with it, and in fact, the OSX installer that's about to land. You can unselect NPM install, and Node's still going to function, just not as well. I just want to make sure that wording is not super tight.
Right. I mean, is there a reason that we wouldn't want to integrate or consider NPM development inside of core development? I mean, like we currently have like parallel kind of LTS and current lines. Like there is an integration there.
Bundle, but
separation of like concerns.
It's separated as being a completely independent project. It would still be an independent project, just like core is an independent project. It would just be under the TSC. So the TSC would be like responsible for making sure that the communication and the infrastructure was there for them to continue to work.
I find like using NPM as a litmus test for is this specific, is this a well phrased policy? That's good, but let's acknowledge that NPM is a little bit like particular, and it's also hypothetical. It's not even in the foundation at this point. So I think if you look at the other projects, we'd mostly be like, this policy would lead to desirable results. I mean, like libv is under core, probably any V8 work that we do, and same goes for series and OpenSSL, and like the conference would be out of the core. Like that makes sense to me. So to me, it sounds good actually.
What do we do about that entire neutral ownership under the foundation thing under this sort of policy?
What do you mean? So the mentorship stuff is carved out as an exception to this, and we're basically going to mentor projects as part of the TSC, and then put them, like, they would just be hosted somewhere else long term, and so we're going to need to like either find or invent a place for them to land. But that's literally a project that we have to kick down the road, and it's not something that the TSC can solve by itself.
So what do we do in the short term?
In the short term, we just leave it where it is. We just leave it where it is for now. I mean, yeah, we're not going to like jettison any projects, and also I think that I mean, we'll have to have this conversation. What do you mean?
What I'm asking is, like, look at the Express situation. Like, what do we do with that then? Do we move it under a foundation-owned GitHub repo or not then?
Well, we didn't do that anyway. Well, I mean, no. So we okay. I see what you're saying. Okay, so you're saying that as part of the mentorship, we do need to put something into a neutral place. So do we still have the flexibility to do that, is what you're asking?
Well, it's Express, not a neutral place, like the Express GitHub org.
Well, I think that you can be...
Yeah, nowadays.
Yeah, well...
Yeah, so I think it kind of got.
I think this part needs to be cleared. This part needs to be made clear. I think in the changes, Michael, is how this particular stuff comes together. So things like Express, it's moved into the foundation, but its relationship with Node TSC, Node Core, is what we're trying to sketch out. So when Express came over, the Express.js org, the Pillar.js org, and the JSHP org, those three, the ownership of those GitHub organizations transferred to the foundation. But those are not under the responsibility of the Node TSC. Michael and I, as the mentors, have ownership there. To help, to facilitate our role as mentors. But that doesn't mean that this TSC gets to make decisions over that project, right? We're just there to help guide. So I think that's what we need to clarify the relationship. So those organizations do fall under the foundation as a whole, the Node Foundation, but they don't fall under the Node Core project.
Right. I mean, essentially all of that ownership will stay where it is today. It wouldn't change. Sorry, there's some stuff in the background here. But one of the reasons why it's not spelled out as explicitly in the document is that when we figure out where things will go long term, we may decide to change how we structure that ownership, right? Like if it's going to eventually go into a different foundation, we may work out an agreement where the TSC is part of that foundation in some way, and we can run the mentorship through there. Or if there's another part of the Node Foundation where we put these projects, then that would be part of that as well. So this is sort of part of that moving forward thing. Once we figure out where these projects go, this will be more explicit. But nothing is changing. We're not jettisoning any of the Express stuff at all. That's still like under the foundation.
It's that the Express isn't under this working group's purview, you're saying, versus it's still under the foundation's purview. Is that?
Yes.
Yes, I mean you could kind of think of mentorship as like a project inside of the TSC, where like the TSC is keeping up to date with like how things are going. Like we can give you an update about like how Express is going, and it's going pretty well. While we're mentoring a project and getting its legs and everything, but it's not like we're intervening. They still have a lot of autonomy.
Right.
So adopting this, would that be suggesting that there is, if we adopt it, is there an intention to jettison Express? Is that the risk here, that we're going to say, right, Express, we're going to kick you out at some point? I mean, is that a great message to send?
So here's the thing, right? We can't do anything to Express that Express's own governance doesn't want us to do. So what we're going to have to do is really think about like what is a good place and structure for projects like this in the future. Build that place somewhere. And a lot of this isn't the responsibility of people here because it won't be under the TSC, but that place will need to be attractive enough for Express to want to go there and for them to elect to go there.
Well, so what happens with Express is a decision between the Foundation board and the Express TC. This group here is our only role with regards to Express is to mentor that TC as they establish their governance. So if at some point in the future, the Express TC says, hey, this isn't really working out, we want to go somewhere else for whatever reason, that's a discussion that TC needs to have with the Foundation board, not us. Us being the TSC, the Node TSC.
Right, now was the Node...
Now, Michael and I as the mentors would come and say, hey, this is what's going on, but it's not our place to influence that decision.
Well, and hopefully at that point, they don't even need us as mentors anymore. Like they've got a bunch of, they'll have an active TSC with a lot of committers, and it'll be totally independent. What were you saying, Michael Dawson?
I was going to say, what's the line between the TSC and the CTC then?
CTC is right under the TSC. Like that's basically where it is now. There's just less. There's a couple working groups that pop up under the TSC, but the CTC and TSC have a very similar relationship that they do now.
Okay, so there'd still be that the TSC is looking at higher level things, but really still node focused.
Yes.
Because it's the node marketing team and the node whatever versus, you know, at one point it was going to be the group that would look over, I guess, the potentially different projects where it's, you know, they're not as node focused like Express.
Correct. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So what's the path forward here, Michael? Do we need to agree on this? Are we looking to just get agreement on merging it as it is, or what's a path forward that doesn't involve too much?
So yeah. So we haven't discussed the other part of it. So right now we just discussed the scope part. Is there anybody that objects to the scope part, and can we just like get a quick vote on that, up or down?
Which part is the scope part?
It's saying that we're not going to be a long-term umbrella and that we're going to have projects that are integrated into core development. Projects and working groups that are integrated into core development in some way, even if their scope is larger than core development.
I'm a little bit hesitant with that exact language. I'm not sure why yet.
I don't have a clear understanding of, like, are we saying that we're stepping back from, you know, thinking we should be pulling in other independent groups, or is it that that hasn't changed, but we are saying that when we do that, those won't be under the TSC, they'll be directly, you know, related to the Foundation?
I think it's trying to draw more of a distinction between what things would come in under the Foundation independently of core versus what things are more central to core and should therefore be under kind of the the Node Core TSC's purview. So an example would be, like some of the debug tools, right? We
There's
want
a
to
lot
bring
of
some
noise.
of
I
those
can't
things
really
in.
hear you, James.
Sure.
Can everybody else read?
Right. So if somebody wanted to work on some of the debug tools, for instance, that are really central to core, that have been around there for a while, and bring those into core, right? Then that's something that is very central and could easily come in as a project under the TSC, similar to what we did with NAN, right? Or the CITGM.
Node.js
but
as well is a good example.
In Node.js, right? But if it's something that is not really central to core, like an Express, or some of these, more ecosystem-focused things, then those things would really make more sense to come in as independent things under the foundation rather than under the TSC. So it's really trying to draw a clear distinction between what we as a TSC have purview over and have interest in having purview over, than what is better left as an independent project.
Right. Okay. So that I can understand that, and then I'd say the concern is whether, when the foundation was first set up, it was like, well, the technical decisions are deferred to the TSC. This dilutes that somewhat in that, the foundation could bring in additional projects that the node technical leaders might not agree with, but wouldn't necessarily be involved in the decision, right?
Well, we have our involvement in the decision because the board needs to decide, and we have representation on the board through ROD. So we would be expected to weigh in on that, just like any other board member would weigh in on it.
I'm not necessarily saying I have that concern. I'm just saying that could be the one thing I could imagine people being concerned about.
That's my concern. It really is. If we limit our scope too much here, then does that open the avenue for more easily bringing other technical sections of the foundation in? Because the foundation, as far as I'm concerned, should be 3 sections, and the technical section should be led by the TSC. And if we open the door at all to having a separate technical section to the foundation, I think that's going to lead to a bad place. So I'm just a bit concerned about limiting ourselves to the point where that becomes a reasonable thing to do, and I don't want that to be reasonable.
Right. The other model is that the TSC expands to include representatives from these other projects, so that the existing group gets to decide what comes in, and then once you've made the decision to say like Express should come in, they get a representation, which maybe dilutes the original group. But you had involvement in that initial decision, so you sort of got what you asked for.
Yeah.
So I think the thing that some of the board members are struggling with, and that we also, like every one of these meetings, there's been struggle over, is having things so close to core when you bring them in blesses them in a particular way that nobody really wants to do. And as far as representation goes, this group is not a great representation of the broader community. So if you were to create a place for projects to land, you would probably want it to look a bit different than this and not have everything be branded as this thing that sits right next to Node Core. So that's the main concern. So it's not that there shouldn't be an autonomous group that has these projects in the future. It's that should probably be separated from core in a really distinctive way, without removing any of the ability of this group to bring in projects that do need to be integrated into core development, right? Like, we wouldn't want to be in a situation where, the TSC could not bring in something like Node.js or NAN in the future.
Right, but I guess it's like, do you need, you're almost describing a third level, but if you have that third level, do you need the TSC and the CTC, or do they just collapse back into one?
I think that the volume of work, even in managing all of the little components that are outside of core, like committing to core, is enough of a task to keep them separate. I mean, the CTC is getting bigger and has like a fuller plate every meeting. I wouldn't want to combine that group with another group.
Yeah, I mean, even this discussion would seem out of place in the main CTC discussion.
Sure.
Right.
Okay,
There's a larger group of people that have more interest in the technical aspects, and this smaller group is more interested in kind of these higher level organizational type of discussions. I think maintaining that is valuable, but I would almost consider recasting the TSC as a subgroup of the CTC rather than as two separate groups, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I know what you're saying. Like, the CTC has the overall authority because, all the things that the things you talk about being part of the TSC are now really so related to core that, the core technical committee should still have input on those, but they've delegated to the smaller set that care about looking at the bigger picture.
So, I mean, these things don't fit into a hierarchy like that, though, right? I mean, you really have to look at it as a sort of an autonomous unit of responsibilities. So, the CTC does currently own all of core and everything that ever gets committed to core. But you wouldn't want them managing the website, and you wouldn't expect them to really even be on top of what was going into the website. They're focused on core. So, who is thinking about organization-wide, project-wide, all of the little components to get fit together? Like, who is kind of thinking about that and trying to make sure that it's all running? And I mean, the answer is effectively nobody right now. But I think we're hitting a point where that's not tenable anymore.
And when we first did this split, if you remember back to the discussions, I think Michael, you instigated it, which was to have two separate meetings, one for organizational and one for technical. It's essentially what we've ended up with TSC and CTC, but the structure hasn't been documented to be quite that.
Well, and I think all of it, we also left kind of the website under the CTC as well, so we didn't take enough, I think, interest in that, which was a mistake. And some of the other groups that probably should have been brought up to the top as well. But also, I think you have to, another factor in this is that the the TSC has a board seat, and so overseeing all of the components of core and being specifically focused on core, but having a more holistic view of it is really useful for the board representation part of that, because it can make sure that the foundation is in alignment with all of the moving parts of core. And if you lose focus because you start broadening too much, it makes that difficult, and then puts way more pressure on one representative to do all of that. Yeah.
Right. So I guess looking
Well, that sounds like you're opening the door for more representatives from different technical sides of the project, Michael.
So that's not I don't think that's on the table. I mean, that's some far future stuff, and that's kind of up to the board. But I don't. Yeah, I have no idea what that's going to look like, and we already are close to some math limitations on board representation that we would have to worry about if we were to start adding more.
Okay, we're getting towards the end of our time. Michael, can we put together some wording for what needs to be voted on? Let's just make a sentence, even if it's just we need to vote on this part of the pull request or the whole pull request. Let's just make it actionable for next week.
Right. It sounds like there's trepidation about the wording, but not the concept, I guess. And also,
I thought I heard Rod show some concern over the concept of having another technical group that wasn't related to the TSC.
That comes back to wording.
If it did exist.
I just don't want the wording to make it so that 6 months down the track, some development happens, and we need to expand the scope of the foundation to include, something. And we look at the TSC and we say, well, the TSC has bound itself by this in this way, therefore it's not the right place for it to go. Therefore, the foundation is going to have multiple technical groups operating directly underneath the board. I don't want that to be the case. I don't think that's going to be a healthy place to be. And I'd rather we make sure that the TSC can be the home of technical execution within the foundation. That's all. That's really what I'm concerned about.
Right, because I kind of see the proposal as it would result in Express being its own technical committee reporting to the board.
That's
That
what it would
scale.
basically do.
That wouldn't scale though, right? Like we know that wouldn't scale. So we're kind of kicking the can on that problem a little bit.
So if we went down that road, what we'd probably ultimately end up with is a higher level. I hate to use the term like a TSC of TCs.
Right. That's what I was mentioning.
Where the Express TC would be there, the Node TSC would be there. Right. But if we go with that approach, then we might as well just keep this TSC as that body.
Also, if the TSC wants to expand its scope later beyond this, this can get changed, and you can say to the board, hey, we want to take on this responsibility or whatever. What this mainly does is that it means that projects like Appium and other projects that have been kind of pinging us lately can stop sending applications to be mentored because we're trying to focus it a little bit more.
That's kind of that's the decision on what kind of projects can come in at all into the foundation, right? Not whether the TSC would have an involvement of projects when they do come in.
Yeah.
I mean, in reality, the board is not going to do anything that the TSC is going to be super mad about. I mean, that's just highly unlikely. And yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that. I mean, technically, the board could do whatever it wants whenever it wants. So technically, the board could go off and start a project. But it's just really unlikely right now.
Yeah, I also have more concerns about what's actually there than the actual wording of the thing. Also, I hope we don't get on this role of try to restructure every 2 months. That would be very tedious.
Yeah, this idea that we could change again. I think once we change once, there's going to be a certain amount of inertia to that decision. It's going to make it quite difficult to change it later on. Even though in theory it should be easy, I think it becomes much more difficult. I think we want to take a little bit of time right now to make sure we get this right.
Yeah, I mean, particularly if you limit the scope, I think it's harder to then say, well, no, wait a sec, we want it expanded again.
Well, mostly that's an issue when there are other bodies that have now claimed that part of the scope.
Well, exactly. I mean, so if you limit the TSC to not include, technical oversight or technical relation to Express, and now Express has its own, it's hard. It'll be hard later on to say, well, wait a sec, no, they should be involved. TSC should be involved.
Yes. Although, I mean, arguably, with Express, we don't really the people that are now on the TSC don't really care. But yeah, it's not. I'm all confused again, actually. So my understanding currently is with this proposal, we this TSC, this group of people we would limit ourselves pretty much to Node Core, and then there will be another TSC which will oversee Core as well as Express and Appium and.
No. You're projecting it out too far. We don't know where those projects are going to live long term, and wherever they do end up living long term, that they're going to be independently functioning bodies anyway that don't need a lot of oversight, right? This is in the future. What we're saying
would
is
be
that the
directly under the board.
I don't know. They could be in another foundation. We could we have no like Express is going to go wherever they want to go, wherever we figure out the best structure to be an umbrella program.
But it could end up directly under the foundation, or
Well, I think
there's only like a handful of possibilities. Like it either goes in a Node foundation, and with your proposal, it would be directly under the board, or it would be in a different foundation. And that's pretty much the only options I see.
The question here is, what does the TSC want to focus on, not where things outside of what we might want to focus on end up, right? Like if the TSC wants to be more focused on core, and by the way, like TSC would be focused on like build and the localization work, and then in libuv as well as core, right? So it's all of the stuff around core that's integrated into core development.
Okay, well, there's two issues then. It sounds like we're conflating two things. What does the TSC want to focus on, and what do we think the foundation should be focused on at a technical level? I don't particularly want to separate those two things right now. And if this is all about saying the TSC is only about core, and there is scope for introducing other technical parts of the foundation, I'm a big -1 on that. I don't want to see the board have to get involved in deciding allocation of resources across technical components of the foundation. I don't want the board to get involved in mediating things between technical sides of the foundation. I think that's the role that the TSC should take.
Yes, I
So
agree with.
in the meantime, I'm happy to come up with a structure that says, okay, Appium just doesn't fit, and these other projects, they don't fit right now. It just doesn't make sense for us. Yeah. But I'm not happy opening the door for them to come in through a different way. I'm not happy with that at all.
It's the top of the hour, by the way. Is there more on the agenda, or is this the last one?
There was another one, but I think it wasn't really important. It was it was the same question, really. Michael Dawson's thing about
right.
Yeah. So let's try and make this actionable for next week. Take it back to GitHub, and we can have one-on-one discussions as well if that helps. But I do have to drop as well, so I'm going to drop. If anyone wants to continue, that's fine. But I've got to go. So. Sorry, I've got another important meeting.
All right. So ideally, like we get like a sort of pull request to which we can say like yay or nay, and that would not change after we vote on it. Like I think that'd be okay.
Now, I think it might be useful instead of rewording a document. It could be a simple question as to, should the TSC try and word it so that it's clear on the specific issues, the scope of the TSC is, and would that result in other similar relationships with the board or not?
Now, as going through this conversation, I might take a alternate look at it and put together an alternate description, just so we can have something to compare it against. To make sure we understand what it is, we make sure we have a good understanding of what it is that we're deciding on, so we have something else to compare it to. So I think there's
I think that's
a ton of confusion still. So
I think that's a good idea. In particular, I mean, maybe this is I shouldn't. No, never mind. Sorry.
What were you going to say? Well, at some point there was a proposal, I think by Michael, that stated that the mission of the foundation was to promote and encourage the adoption of Node, right? And then still give the TSC some flexibility on how to implement that, right? And it doesn't mean that it has to go and host a whole bunch of projects, but it leaves the option to do so.
Right, and still it was the TSC who would be making those decisions. What's in the best interest of Node? Yes,
and this proposal now precludes the option to host other projects. So I was more comfortable with the in-between proposal that we had to give the TSC the authority, but not to necessarily go and host any project that applies.
Right. So with Rob gone, and I also have to get back. We like see you next week. Is that the idea? Yep.
Yeah, sounds good.
Right.
Okay, talk to you guys later. Bye.
Okay, bye.
Sadness. Well, thanks for your time, everyone. Goodbye.